All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Lisa, that's some great work that you guys are doing with plant breeding and getting more varieties available to us is exactly what we're looking for. What I'm going to talk about is some of the work that we've been doing on farms with forages and what can we grow? How do they feed? How do they test? And what options do we have from early spring to late fall? So my slides will kind of just work our way through the growing season. We'll kind of start with what are some of the goals of growing, stepping away from just pure alfalfa into some kind of mix. And one, if we're going to grow some kind of forage mix, it needs to be something that's going to be cow worthy. Our cow is going to milk on it. Is there going to be any yield behind it? So that's kind of foundational. It needs to accomplish that. I think the other part of this is in a crop rotation, we're really looking for these forage blends to do something for soil building. Building soil aggregate stability is probably the number one focus of these forages um, in the rotation. And another thing we want these forage blends to do is to make good use of our nutrients, whether it's surface applied manure or some other kind of fertilizer program. And some of the broadleaves and grasses do a really great job of taking up nutrients, specifically manure. We can fall apply manure to a cover and have that plant not only grow with it, but take it into the root system and give it back to us next year for spring growth and even return us some next year for the corn crop. So the diversity or the versatility of these is excellent. The picture here is someone's applying spring manure to a early cover crop, and you can see on the left that these these species will really grow with some manure on it. A comment I would make is that typically farms are waiting for flag leaf before they chop this forage for dairy quality. And my experience is that flag leaf is not a good indicator. You need to be doing scissor cuts. We've been taking we take scissor cuts on these crops once they get to be about 18 inches tall, well before flag leaf. And as we take scissor cuts every 4 days, we'll start to plot the rate of change. And a lot of times we're taking that for dairy quality feed well before flag leaf. So just something to keep in mind. This is a five-way perennial blend. And we've added the bulk of this mix is alfalfa, as you can see in the picture. We got some clovers, some grasses, and a little bit of broadleaves, which would be some chicory and plantain. And what we've done is we'll flag off an area in the field that's maybe 20 or 25 feet square, and they'll leave that area unmowed. So they'll mow the field and leave that area, and we'll go in there a week later and take scissor cuts. And then we'll go in 2 weeks later and take scissor cuts because we're really trying to see what's the persistency, what's the rate of change, quality change, and yield change of these mixes. And so what we found is that depending on the cutting, these mixes can be very, very persistent and hold their quality. Certainly this is first crop up in northern Wisconsin. So this next slide shows 1 week after harvest, we took the scissor cutting out of that field and we're running over 23% protein. We're running digestible fiber of almost 70, which is excellent. We got sugar content of 18. We got a relative feed quality, a forage quality of 268. I mean, this is really this high-powered forage mix. We look at this 2 weeks after it was cut, and we're still running 23% protein. NDFD digestibility is down a little bit, but it's still over 70. And our relative forage quality is still running 260. So this mix is holding quality for quite a while. And what that allows us to do, it allows us the option to say, if we need to move around a weather event, whether it's rain coming or whatever, we build some confidence that even if we wait, we're still going to hold on to quality, certainly on this first crop. This next slide is what we call a spring mix. This was a a mix of some annual ryegrass, some forage rape, and some clover that we planted in the spring. The intention on this was to plant it in the spring, harvest it 2 or 3 times during the summer and fall, and then next spring harvest it again as another cutting, and then plant corn into it. So we have a pretty good idea what the clovers and grasses do. They're actually fairly high quality. One of the questions was, what about this forage rape? So we sampled this forage rape before we harvested it to see what it's contributing. And that box in the bottom is the forage rape that was done wet chemistry. And so we accrue protein at 22% and NDFD 30 of 81. This is really fairly rich feed. A comment I'll make on these broadleafs is that they also hold a lot of water, and it really changes our dry down and our harvest practices. So the reason we have broadleafs in there, in this case, it was forage rape and some of the perennial mixes, it could be plantain and chicory. The reason they're in there is as we bring more families into the mix, we bring more biological diversity, more soil building, and I really think it has a positive impact on rumen performance as well. As you bring them a more diverse mix into the rumen, you're just building a more robust microbial population. You've seen cows milk extremely well on these different mixes. Um, but from a management standpoint, keeping these broadleafs at a really low level is important just for our comfort level in being able to harvest it because they do hold on to moisture. And in this picture here, you can see there's quite a bit of that forage rape. And in future, we would cut that forage rape either out or back to a much lower level. This next picture is this is in late June now. This is um, a very light soil, a light sandy soil that they struggled with alfalfa in. We put a three-way clover blend in here. So this is year 3 of this clover blend, and it's doing extremely well. The We see forage quality peaking as it flowers, yield and quality peaking. And these guys are getting a ton and a half of dry matter here in late June off of this clover mix, where in the past alfalfa just really struggled to get established. So it's an option on certain pieces of ground. Clover can handle water and dry weather better than some other species, and so there may be places that fits in. And this could be maybe the first thing you harvest before second crop as you move from first crop to second crop. This is a perennial mix. Is a 7-way blend. Again, this is alfalfa is a predominant player in the mix, and the reason alfalfa is a predominant player in a lot of these blends is alfalfa has a hard time competing in a mix when you start getting below, 8, 9 pounds per acre in a blend when you might have 22 pounds per acre total. You start getting low rates of alfalfa and has a hard time of competing. So as we've moved through these blends in the early years of working with this, we were staying at 13, 14, 15 pounds of alfalfa and then coming in with maybe 3 or 4 pounds of grass, a couple pounds of clover, and then some plantain and chicory. Anyway, so this is a 7-way blend. This is year 2 of this blend. In the background, you can see the hay was cut a week ago. That's a 30-day cutting window or cutting since the previous cutting. And we went into this field. So this area was left just like we'd done in first crop. And we tested the forage quality a week after and 2 weeks after it was cut. Remember, that was a 30-day cutting window from the previous harvest. So these 2 samples here, 1 week post-harvest, this is in July now, we're running 23% protein and a relative forage quality of about 194. That's pretty acceptable. 2 weeks after harvest, so now you're looking at 14 and 30 days, you're looking at 44 days since it was last cut. We're looking at about 19% protein and a relative forage quality um, of about 135. I can't see it or it's hard to see on the screen, but that's what it is. So we see as we get out there in July that this stuff can start to fall off faster than it did in first crop. A note is on this UNDF 30 or UNDF 240, whatever you want to look at for fiber, for either undigestible fiber or digestible fiber. Because the bulk of this mix was alfalfa, we can see how keeping alfalfa out there longer and longer, our digestible fiber really falls off. And as we blend our mixes in the future, we're bringing our alfalfa in these mixes down into that 10, 11, or 12 pounds and bringing more diverse species, more other species in there because we find that they will hold digestible fiber better than alfalfa will and still give us potentially a longer harvest window. So these are things that we're learning as we play with these perennial mixes. So here we are in August. This is a third cutting on a perennial mix, got alfalfa, clovers, grasses, plantain, and chicory. The chicory is in there at a half a pound. The plantain or the chicory and plantain are in there at a half a pound apiece. We've gone to a quarter of a pound of chicory now. Um, a couple of things to keep in mind with harvesting these mixes is having a good idea of what's in the mix, like how much grass is in there this cutting. Like walk the field and just have an idea how much grass is there versus broadleaves, how much clover and alfalfa is in there, because those are going to be determining factors on how wide you set your windrow and how long it takes to dry. So as if in the summertime my grasses start to get thin because they're not taking the heat so well, and I got more broadleaves and and legumes in there, I may be setting my windrow quite wide, unlike I might do typically for just alfalfa, to try and get this dried down a little bit. Another thing, if I've got this mix in on my farm and I've got straight alfalfa on fields, as I work my way into transitioning to multi-species, I may cut this first, then I mow all my alfalfa, put up all my alfalfa, then come back and put this up last because it takes longer to dry until I learn how to manage it. So just some of the little things that we're finding farms are having to do and learning to do just in managing these. So this is late September, and this is again multi-mix. We're getting a lot of fall growth. You can see those striped plants. That's the plantain. So we get a lot of fall growth. It gives us quite a few options on what we want to do with it. We can take a late cutting on this. One thing that we see in these multi-species that alfalfa has is a lot less subject to winter kill in these diverse mixes. I think because it's got a lot of support network around it. It's not so exposed. You got this massive root system, a lot more protection. So we can take a later cutting of this forage mix if we want to. We can leave this simply as biomass for the soil. We can come through in here in this particular field, we came through with 10,000 gallons of fall manure applied into this, and we'll be planting. So we'll be taking this as another year of forage in 2026. Another option would be I could put manure on this in the fall, and then in the spring, terminate it, plant my corn into it. Kind of on a side note, one of the things that we've been looking at is the impact of putting manure on these fall cover crops, whether it's a multi-mix or rye, and or in the spring, and then timing our termination of them so that we're getting spring growth, but we're not getting massive spring growth, and then allowing the nutrients within the plants, within the root system, and from the manure that we applied to go back and feed our our corn crop during the growing season. And we see that as these nutrients are released and the organic nitrogen is converted to nitrates throughout the season, we've seen nitrate levels, which is what you test for in your PSNT and what's available to plants as nitrogen, being higher in the fall than it was um, after we applied side dressing in June, and that's from that tremendous breakdown of organic matter. So in these situations, we're backing way off on side dressing. In some field situations, we're no longer side dressing. We have enough organic nitrogen to sustain the crop through the growing season. The other thing this diverse mix is doing is building soil aggregate, or the ability of soils to take in and hold water. So there's a lot of benefits to this from a crop rotation. Another thing that we're looking at, our goal is to have first and second year corn. So if we can cut our tighten up our crop rotations and move into first and second year corn, we get huge bumps in corn performance with much lower inputs. And so what we're looking at using this forage mix for is not only a forage mix, but as a soil builder, and it allows us to tighten up our crop rotation. So we're going maybe new seeding plus 2 years of this, and then we're right back into corn again. So it's bringing a lot to the farm. This is a warm season mix of sorghum sudan. We also had, so this is planted after wheat, so we took wheat off, put manure on, took the straw off, put manure on, and planted this uh, annual mix of sorghum sudan that had a fall cover built into it as well. So there was some rye in there, and there's a bit of clover. And so here we are in late September with, again, really high quality feed that can be put up for whoever you want to feed it to, whether it's cows or heifers or dry cows. We got about 1.5 tons of dry matter, 1.8 tons of dry matter off of this field. A note on this is that um, sorghum sudan is probably the most beneficial crop we can grow to stimulate mycorrhizal fungi. So any chance that we can or you can to sneak some sorghum sudan in there, you're doing tremendous good for your mycorrhizal fungi. So coming in after wheat and only having to plant once because we've got a fall cover and a winter cover in there really helps us a lot. And this so after the wheat came off, we put manure on, and then we took this off, and we can put manure back on there again in the fall. So it just does a great job of making use of nutrients. My last slide here. This is just again, this is mid to late October. This is a multi-mix. You can see there's got plenty of grasses in here. You got some chicory, the big chicory leaves. If you let those go, it looks like a tobacco plant. And obviously you got some clover and alfalfa. A comment on the alfalfa with these mixes is if we can go with a high fall dormancy, meaning these don't shut down until later in the fall, we get great fall growth, which really helps. So it's something to watch is your fall dormancy ratings on alfalfa is let this grow in the fall so we can either take it for a crop or we can continue to do soil building as long as we can um, in the year. So those are a few things I want to bring up. If there's questions, we can take them now or take them later.
I want to go to the question about there's lots of interest in more complex mixtures for cover crops across varied farm locations. But would growers generally be better off planting a single species or 2 to 3 component mixtures that are suited for the soil and weather on the farm? So I'm going to let whoever wants to address that, if it's Bill or Lisa or Dan, if you want to show your or turn your video on, go ahead and give us your answer.
I'll take a first swing at that. And these multi mixes are great things that a person can graduate as they get comfortable. I think a first good step is to add a bit of grass into a second or third year alfalfa. You could put in 3, 4, 5, 6 pounds of grass in there. And if things don't turn out the way you want, the alfalfa stand is only going to last another year or two anyway. But you can see how these grasses uh, can contribute and hold quality in alfalfa field. If you're going outside of something like that, having just a couple, 2 or 3 species in a mix is a great way to go. Um, we often see covers with rye, vetch, and clovers being one of them. Of course, peas and oats is one that we're very familiar with, and there's nothing wrong with starting with peas and oats, maybe adding something to it. So just keep in mind that the soils that you're planting into will determine some of what you want to put in the mix and how you want to manage it.
Any
Yeah,
other
I would.
comments? Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
definitely agree with Bill. Also, you want to take a consideration what your goals are. I mean, if your goals are forages, yeah, then there's a whole section that we talk about forages, and then soil health, that type of thing. Also, be um, know your planting dates, because some of these will not establish if you plant them too late. We all gravitate to rye because we could plant that in very cold soil and everything. So yeah, kind of know your planting date and then choose your species according to how much growth you're expecting in the fall.
And I'd say two things with that too. So Dan, there is a helpful cover crop species selector tool through the Northeast Cover Crop Council. And so if you're just like, oh my gosh, there's so many species, what do I do? Or you have a kind of weird application, they've aggregated a lot of data to try to understand, okay, I've got a wet spot that I want to plant in October or whatever. And you can kind of type that in and see what species they might recommend for your particular application, which is great. And then another thing I would say, just most of you probably know, but the number one thing growers say is to start small. So as you start with species, just do a small piece, and then you can see if you like a 5 species mix rather than wasting all that money on like 300 acres and not liking it, right? So that's my 2 cents.
Very good. And then Lisa was wondering, Bill, do you frost seed red clover into second or third year alfalfa?
I typically don't because what I'm looking for at that point in time is something that's more of a grass. Grass does a really nice job of pushing carbon into the soil or sugars in. And I may start out with a mix with clover, but I don't come after 2 or 3 years and put clover in. If I'm going to put something in, I'm going to put a grass in.
All right. Next question. Are there barriers remaining for growers to graze or harvest cover crops and still get cost sharing through various programs? That's a great question. Where are our NRCS folks when we need them? You got something, Dan?
No, I was just saying that I did see Colby on here, so maybe he could chime in about the cost sharing thing. Um, but I know talking with a couple watershed groups that some of these are actually starting to use like those wireless those collars to help graze some of these covers out on fields. So that doesn't answer the question about the cost share, but farmers are starting to think outside the box as far as getting animals out on these covers in non-forage producing fields.
And at the risk of speaking incorrectly, best to check with your what that contract looks like and make sure that you are okay and you don't just assume that it's an opportunity.
Yep.
But I do feel like there's been discussions about that becoming more prevalent, that we're capturing some of that via grazing. But all right. Oh, thank you, Dan, for that selector tool. Oh, you can graze cover crops under NRCS programs. Thank you, Colby. What a great discussion. And there was a little bit of a discussion about the sorghum Sudan mixes late season after that wheat harvest. And I think, John made a good point about the prussic acid. Did you want to expand on that at all, Bill?
The So when our sorghum plants get frosted, prussic acid is a chemical change that happens that can be dangerous to cattle, certainly grazing it. So the idea is to let that plant metabolize, grow and metabolize and break down some of that. If so, in grazing sorghum sedan after frost, that's dangerous. You got to pull cattle off it. If we're making it for forage, oftentimes if we're making there's two scenarios. If I grew a sorghum plant and it got really big, and I'm waiting for it to freeze in order to bring the moisture down, or even if it's a younger plant, I'm waiting it to freeze to bring the moisture down. A lot of times that's what guys are doing to get this sorghum sudan or sorghum into the right moisture window. Let the thing freeze. It's still going to take a few days to pull the moisture down, but if I'm ensiling it, that's going to break that prussic acid down and take away most of the risk of that. So ensiling and time are your friends on that.
Fabulous.
The,
Well,
the
that is,
question that
oh,
Lisa
go ahead.
asked about why would you plant grass into an alfalfa stand 2 or 3 years out, and I think what I'm saying there is as an introduction for people to get into diversity, that one way to dip your toe into it is to put some grass into your alfalfa and see how it performs both from a growth and harvest standpoint. There's a lot of fear of having grass in there. How am I going to harvest it? And I got grass balls and my forward, I'm going to get molding. So if I do that in year 2 or 3, I can kind of dip my toe into this multi-mix concept without really a lot of risk. So that would be the thought on that. Otherwise, I agree with Lisa. I'd put it in up front. One comment with these multi-species is that um, if I get a multi-species, my herbicide program is kind of gone, right? So I got everything under the sun in there, and there's even if I got Roundup Ready alfalfa, that's I'm not going to be able to spray for weeds. I need to mow for weeds, so that's going to be my weed management practice is mowing. But the competition is going to take it out as well. Help control that.
Awesome. Very good. I think that is the end of the questions and all the time that we have today. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you for sticking around to answer some of those great questions we had.